Good evening, Europe, and welcome to Green Screen. I'm your host, Sam Murray, and over the next few months, we will be bringing you a wide range of online film screenings and invite you to join our debates on the future of Europe, post-COVID recovery, and making our societies more resilient and sustainable. Tonight's theme for our discussion is Together for Climate Action. Today, we are in a climate emergency, and it's real. Forest fires, floods, dry, parched earth. Our planet is wounded and in pain, cut open by greed, profit, and an intolerable stripping of natural resources. We have had to sit back and place trust in leadership that showboats with greenwashing, expecting a round of applause for recycling their lunch, getting on a bike, or using a metal straw. This is growing more than tiresome. This saccharine performative politics that denies the true emergency we face today on our planet. Individuals are blamed for their actions as if their contribution is a significant impact when the corporate capitalist structure is driving our planet, hurtling it towards extinction. Corporations are committing ecocide in the name of profit, pumping, drilling, and cutting the veins of our planet, desperate to fulfill their unsustainable lifestyle and hoarding wealth of the planet. They are not held to account. They are invited into the room when climate negotiations are happening, pulling their strings to stop politicians committing to a bare minimum course of action. This hellish production of Groundhog Day must stop. The generations who shall inherit the earth are far from meek. We are fed up, we are tired, upset, anxious, and angry. The more climate-denying politicians and corporations cover their ears, the louder our voices grow. From the cries of babies born into poverty and drought to the activists risking their lives to protect our planet, they will hear us. They must act now, or we will. When I was around 14 years of age, I visited Nabbs Ridge Wind Farm for a science project, and I stood underneath the wind turbine, hearing that incredible sound of natural, renewable source of energy becoming power. And I stared up at that turbine and thought to myself, why can't we work more with nature? And what is clear is that we do have solutions to fight the climate emergency, from renewable energy to cutting unnecessary consumption. And the desire for people to do so is growing stronger by the day. We can work with nature, not against it. And we know that another world is possible. Today's film really captures the story of youth activism and how the young people who will inherit this planet have really decided to speak truth to power. This film is part of our Green Screen project, and it's now my great honour and privilege to invite to join me on screen, as always, the Secretary General of the European Greens, Mar Garcia. Mar, welcome. How are you today?
Hello, Sam. Today, I'm actually very excited about the screening that we have planned ahead. That was available for yesterday and today. So I'm actually it's a very special screening for me today.
So, Mar, why do you think it's important that we need to come together for climate action?
Well, I mean, I think that the the challenge of fighting climate change is probably the biggest or one of the biggest challenge humanity faces, and I think that the transformation that we need is so big that if we don't come together, we're not going to achieve it. So we need to search for as many allies in this transformation as possible. And maybe if you allow me today, Sam, I just want to pay a tribute to the role that the youth movement has played in the fight against climate change. I think that we would not be where we are today, and I know it's not enough. You have pictured a very realistic and painful scenario, but we are where we are today thanks to a lot of people that has been fighting, but especially to the contribution that the youth climate movement has done. And maybe if you allow me also, I want to really especially thank Slatter for directing this film and allowing us to share, because it's actually such a nice sign of this contribution. So, voila.
Thank you, Mara. And I really think that it captures this hope. Although the picture may seem at times very desolate, we know that the younger generations are trying to make change, are trying to make a difference. And I think this film is really, really capturing this story, and hopefully we'll be able to really illuminate it in today's debate as well. And this film is obviously part of the Green Screen project. Is there anything that you would like to tell us a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah, well, I would like to also, comment on this very sweet initiative that it's been now for the 5th time that we put at the service of those interested on discussing politics in a different way. So the Green Screening is this project in which we, through the story of a film, we kind of discuss over very important topics. In this case, the contribution of the youth movement in the fight against climate change. But we've talked about abortion, we'll talk about women's rights, we've talked about health, we've talked about education. So I really would like to invite everybody to join the Green Screening and enjoy it. It's the 3rd Thursday of every month, where the EGP offers the European Green Party offers a film and invites the people to comment on it and then join this debate if they want. A film and offers a conversation, a political conversation over a nice topic through the story that a film brings to us. So yeah, 3rd Thursday of each month. So Wednesday and Thursday, the film is available.
And you can follow all of the various European Green Party and even Green Screen specific social media channels to find out more information about that. Thank you very much, as always, for joining us, Mar. And before we delve into our discussion today, we're just going to take a bit of a look at the trailer for our film, Youth Unstoppable, which you can still stream now. Maybe wait till we've had our discussion and go watch it afterwards if you haven't already. It is definitely one to watch. And Youth Unstoppable is really an incredible insight into the continually developing youth-led resistant movements fighting against the odds for change and to protect our planet. So let's now have a look at our trailer.
When the earth is dying, there shall arise a new tribe of all colors and all creeds. This tribe shall be called the Warriors of the Rainbow, and it will put its faith into actions, not words.
That trailer just still gives me shivers today. It's such an absolutely incredible film, and please do, after we've had our discussion today, make sure you head to the Green Screen website, sign up for a ticket, and make sure you watch this film. It's full of such important messages that you really do need to hear. And today's panel really, really gives me hope that we can change the destiny of this planet. All 4 of our panelists have made incredible contributions to activism that have really pushed governments to sit up and to pay attention. Our first panelist, who is possibly the reason that we are in fact here today, is filmmaker and the director of this incredible documentary, Youth Unstoppable, Slater Jewel Kemker. Welcome, Slater. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just absolutely delighted to be here and to be part of this conversation.
Thank you, and I can't wait to hear more of your insights from the film as well. Our next panelist is Misha Bloss, who I've found a personal inspiration for many, many years, and he is now speaking truth to power in Brussels as a Green Group MEP. Misha, welcome. How are you today?
Thanks a lot for having me, and I'm looking really forward to this debate because a lot of nice pictures from my memories from fights on COPs came up already. So yeah.
Wonderful. And I'm sure you'll be able to hear more about those experiences that you've had during the course of our conversation today. Our next panelist is Clara Winkler, a youth activist and a board member of the Federation of Young European Greens, who is regularly calling out the blah, blah, blah of our world leaders. Hi, Clara. How are you this evening?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you. I'm also super excited for this discussion because, yeah, the film really reinvoked so many memories of the just past COP, and it was really emotional. So I'm super happy to be here.
Wonderful. And we'll definitely want to hear about your experiences about the recent COP as well. And somebody else who was at that COP in Glasgow is Sean Curry, a climate activist whose inspiring social media blogs during the recent COP26 in Glasgow have really helped shed light on the sheer scale of greenwashing that's been happening at the event. So it's such a pleasure to have you with us, Sean. How are you doing this evening?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm well, getting over the greenwashing of COP, and I still have goosebumps from watching the film earlier. It was like super powerful. So I'm really humbled to be part of this discussion. I'm looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on the film there, Sean. So just before I open the discussion, we actually put out a few social media polls into the cyberspace universe before our panel today. We've just had some of the results handed to me. We asked all of our social media followers if they support the youth strikes that have been happening around climate action. And wonderfully, 100% of people who answered our polls said that they supported the youth strikes, and 100% also said they really felt that they identified as part of the Green movement. We've had 65% of our respondents said that they had actually been to a strike, and 35% that they said that they would be going to the next one whenever that may be. We also put out a question asking what changes people would want to see in the world. We've had all kinds of really, really interesting ideas. A really fascinating response we had was really calling for more youth representatives to be involved in climate talks and be involved in discussions around other key policy areas. We've had the suggestion of more carbon taxes and also to have stricter laws on corporations when it comes to the contributions that they're making towards damaging our planet as well. So thank you very much to all of those of you who've been interacting with our social media polls. So to start our discussion today, Slater, I wonder if I could come to you first. Youth Unstoppable really chronicles this incredible journey that youth climate activism has been on. And you start with a point of 7 Colours Suzuki speech in Rio to the present day. But I wanted to ask you, how would you describe what the youth climate movement has achieved over this course of time?
I mean, even just hearing you say that is always, I always get a shiver just remembering and knowing how long young people have been in this space, trying to, at the very least, just have a say in our own lives and to be able to be part of the conversation that defines what the next, what the future of our species looks like. And I think looking at the very beginning with Severin Cole Suzuki calling out leaders on the world stage 3 days before I was born to recently at COP26 in Glasgow, I think what we're seeing is that young people are stepping into their own power. They're stepping into a role of realizing that they have not only the moral and emotional kind of standing within this conversation, but that there is real change that can come about from this voice, from this perspective of the next generation of young people who are trying to not only save the world, but create a better one. I think what we've seen is that it is becoming a lot more global and a lot more inclusive, and that it's very difficult for the media to look away.
I think that's a really, really important point. I really like how you say that, you know, youth activism is essentially been a kind of response to the fact that we really have been trying to have a say in our own lives and really being able to step in and own the power to be able to do that. And Clara, I wonder if I could come to you next in our discussion and ask, do you actually feel that the voices of young people are really being listened to? Are we actually being allowed, as Slater says, to have a say on our own lives? And are we being involved in these dialogues around climate change?
So I think, as Slater said, it becomes harder and harder for the media and the world leaders to look away. And I think we can all agree on that without the youth climate movement, the climate crisis wouldn't be on top of political agendas right now and wouldn't be on top of media headlines, for example. But still, at COP26, we have still been used as tokens. We have tried to make contributions. The youth constituency submitted statements. We met with country delegations. They had beautiful photos with us. And still, in the end, the deal that was like the result of COP26 was just showing that they had not listened to us in any of the crucial points. And that was the point when we, as activists in COP26, realized that we have to take this into our own hands. And then we just went to the media and called them out for everything. And actually, we managed to dominate the headlines after COP26 to actually say that this was a failure and that this narrative that the world leaders tried to proclaim that this was a success, even though it wasn't, didn't even manage to get into the media, was, I think, a really huge success. But it was not because world leaders suddenly tried to listen to us. It was because they couldn't overhear our voice. And yeah, I think that is like seeing those like disappointments of how we have not been listened to. I think now it is the only way of getting our voice heard and being listened to just grow bigger and bigger as a movement and raise our voice louder and louder.
Thank you, Clara. And I think that many of us who've been involved in previous COPs as well will really resonate. I'm sure Slater will agree, as you show us later in the film, where you've been having these photo opportunities with various politicians who say they're listening to young people, but actually when it comes to real talk and real action, to quote Greta Thunberg, it has just all been blah 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 that has been happening as part of that. Misha, I wonder if I can come to you next. Your election to the European Parliament has given hope for many youth activists. And I know when you get the opportunity, you do try and give voice and give platform to youth activists whenever you can. But how do you feel that youth climate activism can empower green politicians like yourself to make the necessary changes we need to see?
I mean, I think the European election is a perfect example of how this empowerment works, because basically what happened is that young people, many under 18 years old, not able to vote, went to the streets and put this on the agenda. And then there was a new president of the European Commission who did not know what she actually should speak about, because she never thought that she would become the European president. And she had to take this topic of the Green Deal. Now, we can discuss whether actually she takes it serious enough, probably not. But the fact that she has to basically put her faith on the question whether the Green Deal will be a success or not, because that's her big project, is the success of the youth movements. They have put it on her agenda. And I think this is how politics really work. No, like, we are only successful inside the European Parliament if there is a crowd outside, if there are people on the streets, if there is activists who ask us to do something, and then it creates a dynamic in which we can push through ambitious policies. And it's what we have right now on the table is not enough, but I think we also have to bear in mind that before Fridays for Future started, there was like basically a 10 years time of climate not being at the top of the agenda, and that has changed now, and that's basically the success of the youth movements.
And I think it was very, very visible, particularly during that 2019 election. I remember campaigning with the Federation of Young European Greens around that it was unavoidable to have conversations without having climate change involved in those discussions as well. And it's been really heartening to see that, as you say, that the Green New Deal, there is now a commissioner responsible for delivering that. Whether it will be delivered in the form that many of the youth activists want is another question. but we can have some kind of hope that because of it's been pushed firmly onto the agenda, and as more younger generations are becoming more educated within themselves about climate change and the impact it's going to have on their lives, that this now is firmly on the agenda will not be pulled off despite the efforts of particular fossil fuel corporations who want to see that. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on that, Misha. And Sean, if I can come to you next, I want to ask you, would we be in the same place that we are now with climate, as Misha says, is on top of the agenda, if it wasn't for the youth climate movement? And how do you kind of feel about the contributions that yourself and other activists have made to ensuring that politicians have to engage with this issue and not ignore it?
Yeah, good question. I think Misha has demonstrated really well with the European Green Deal example of how the rise of youth climate movement, particularly around 2019, did change the agenda and did change policy. And I think that's still going. I mean, COVID-19 really hit the climate movement hard, like it hit all of our lives and all of our movements. But COP26 was really a time where I think we saw undeniably that it's back. We're big and we're growing. And so, for example, at COP26, you have there was a point at which it looked like fossil fuels were going to be taken out of the text. And fossil fuels have never been in a text agreed at a COP. And there was an outcry. And when young people found this out, they organized a protest inside the venue. And it's quite a bizarre process in COP that's later will also know, and Clara as well, and Misha, we all know. That inside the venue, you can organize protests, and you have to give an application form, and you have to say, we'll say this message and this message and this message, and we'll be this number of people, and we'll be in this exact spot, and you're not allowed to mention government names or company names, right? It's a protest, and you're not allowed to mention government names. But nevertheless, young people did this, and they organized a super powerful symbolic protest where they had pictures of eyes on their hands to show that we are looking at you. We are watching politicians, and they were singing, keep it in the text, just keep it in the text. And then fossil fuels is in the COP26 agreement. It's watered down. But I think it shows the power of young people. That, as Misha said, when politicians start saying we are listening to young people, and you then have young people making a very specific demand outside the room that these politicians are negotiating in, it changes what happens. And I think these changes in text, they feel stupid, they feel meaningless to us in our lives when we see the forest fires. But as we saw with the Paris Agreement, it's not been delivered as it should have, but it has, I think, created climate change is like a norm in international politics. That every government, or most governments, want to be seen to be doing stuff on climate change, just like they want to be seen to care about human rights and so on. It's a norm, and I think that's changing politics. It's changing how companies operate, and I think it is making a difference, and that's thanks to young people being outside those negotiating rooms and pressuring them.
And I think that also kind of leaves us with still quite a bit of a hopeful picture. Of course, the action is not happening as fast as we would like. Of course, the agreements are not happening in the words that we want to see. But not only is it firmly on the agenda, but we're now seeing politicians have to, even though in many cases it is greenwashing, have to engage and have this conversation. And when there have been several national elections, happening all across the world in even the past few months, the past few years, there have been questions asked constantly about climate change, and it is here to stay on the agenda. So hopefully that lack of action will slowly be something that politicians can't ignore, will be forced into actually doing as a result of particularly young people calling for that change. And I think this really leads us quite nicely onto the first clip that we're going to show from the film today. Just a quick reminder, you can see this film, you can order a ticket, and you can stream it from the Green Screen website. But this first clip that we're going to show for the film is what I think is really wonderful and gorgeous moment to hear about how youth activism is really described as young people becoming agents of change and being people who can have that power to make change. And this is a really gorgeous moment of the film that I just wanted to share with you all. So let's now take a look at this clip.
I just want people to realize their ability to do something. You know how people say things are not going to change and just sit on their backs doing nothing? I think it's because they don't realize that they themselves are an agent of change. They're not passive beings, they're active beings. So don't have a fatalistic view of the earth. If two girls from, halfway around the world can come together for a single cause, why can't the rest of the world?
I really, really love that sentiment. Don't have a fatalistic view of the world. That there is still, despite all of these things that we see around us, still hope, and that young people can have that agency to make that change. And I just want to open this next question to anyone. Feel free to kind of dive in and respond. And I want to ask all of you on our panel, can young people be agents of change? And also, what are the ways in which young people can be agents of change? What are the ways that you might have experienced in your own activism that you might want to share with us? So would anyone like to jump in on this one? Slater, I'll come to you first if that's okay.
Sure. Sorry, there's some strange light going on. Because I've been in this space for, I guess it's now 15 years. It's insane to think about. I think that the agents of change and what that change looks like has shifted. Not necessarily shifted, but it's become a little bit more of a broader range of how we can be agents of change. I used to feel like I wasn't a real activist, or I wasn't really in the movement if I wasn't someone who would go and chain themselves to a coal plant or something like that. And I think it's really shifted to the sense of people need to be able to fall in love with a new way of living, and people need to, I think, we're all within the space. We all talk about climate change and the environment and how we live as human beings. And we're very familiar with that narrative and that story. But outside of this space, not necessarily everyone thinks about this every day. And so I think we're at this point where we need to find ways to not only inspire young people and inspire others to want to change the world in such a large way, to want to save the world, but we need to bring them in however we can. We need to find ways that people can truly understand what this story is, and they're part of it. I think about my family in the States, and I think about my family in Alberta a lot, because I think I realize that they don't necessarily want to talk to me right now because I've been so angry in the past, and I've been so black and white in the past. And I'm realizing that we don't have any more time to be purely to pick and choose who we work with. I mean, I am definitely on board with this, of course, that fossil fuels we need to get rid of. We need to have a new way of living and of being. But we also need to remember that we're all only going to move forward if we do this together. And we need to find a way to make this a conversation and a journey that everyone wants to be a part of, that it isn't just only soaked in fear and dread, that it goes beyond the climate anxiety, that it goes beyond the grief, that we can maybe heal together, that we can mourn together, and that we can realize that there is still so much worth saving, including communities and cultures and wildlife and the nature that already and is still the nature that is still here. There's still so much worth saving. And I think that's part of the importance of storytelling and making this something that is emotional and is able to be connected on at that human level. I think that's important.
And I think one of the things that this film really achieves, certainly from my perspective, is it really gives a whole wide variety of different avenues where people can find their connection, their point into this discussion and into the debate. And to see the various different perspectives of all of the activists that you've met from all across the world, to hear their individual stories has really allowed a sense of not only a personalization of this debate, but allowed people to see those different avenues that, oh, actually, this thing that I have been experiencing is linked to climate change, and maybe I ought to, sit up and pay attention and connect in to this discussion as well. And this film is just provides so many wonderful avenues for that accessibility in that discussion as well. Sean, I wonder if I could come to you next. Do you have any thoughts on this question of whether young people can be agents of change? And also, do you think that there's ways that we could be making the climate movement more accessible for people to want to engage with and join?
Yeah, so I love the approach that Slater took to this. But before coming to that, maybe to take it back to the film, I think what the film shows going from the start with this speech from the Rio Earth Summit in 1992 from a youth activist whose name I've terribly forgotten, shows that there have been youth activists pushing for change on climate change for decades, but that this has grown so much in the last 10 years. I'd say particularly, personally, I don't know if you'll agree, in the last 3 or 4 years with Fridays for Future. And I would say that this has changed the narrative around young people and climate change, in that young people have always been talked about in relation to climate change, and we were talked about as victims. Politicians would say, we need to do something to protect young people. And they still say this, right? But they also now have to say, at least those in countries like mine, like the United Kingdom, they have to say, we are listening to young people, and young people are showing leadership, and they're taking agency in forcing that change. And I think this is changing the role that young people play in the climate narrative. And I think that's changing the role, or it can change the role that young people have in society. And this can still get bigger. It needs to get bigger for us to force the change that we need. And for us to do that, to come to Sam's question, and to what the angle that Slater came at it from, not everybody needs to lock themselves to a gate or invade a coal mine in Germany. But the climate movement needs to be open to everybody. And I would say we build our movement by bringing people in and making the movement and the work that people do in that movement important and empowering and meaningful to the rest of their lives. So maybe for Slater, if I take it as an example, for you, it's maybe filmmaking, right? And maybe if climate change wasn't a thing, I feel like you might be a filmmaker anyway. But you came into the climate movement, and it was also a way for you to develop this filmmaking. And I think we all have other passions, other things we care about. And we as activists bringing people into the movement, we need to think, what do people want to do, and then get them to do that in the movement and help the movement to make their lives as a whole better. And that's how we grow and win power.
And I think also to add on that, it's this sense of normalizing it, that it is part of our everyday lives, that we realize that it isn't just something that we think about, or we go to COP and then we just don't think about it, or we aren't, protesting until the next COP, that it is part of our everyday lives. It's part of every decision that we make, and it's not necessarily something, out of the ordinary.
Nisha, I wonder if I can bring you in on this question as well, and could you perhaps offer some of your thoughts on whether you think that young people can be agents of change?
Well, I think yes, absolutely. And I think it's quite it's interesting to try to understand. And there have been youth movements. You showed this in the film. Basically, I was a FYG COP delegate in 2009. That was my first COP, and I went to every COP in Europe ever since, except for Glasgow, because I was negotiating the German government agreement. But maybe that also shows the evolvement of how kind of the climate topic became more and more important since in the last 10 years. I think the question is, how do you actually, well, if we can be agents of change, how do you get change? Like, what is the, what are the conditions to create a change? And currently I see, how do you say, the climate crisis has become so existential that you need to change. It's just like not changing is suicide. And the problem is that this situation is there since a long time in the global south, and only now when it becomes actually existential for the young generations here, because they know their future will look very different than their parents' future, it is then actually becoming a topic, and change will come. So And I'm not against it, because we need to have this change. I'm just kind of trying to point out how this situation currently is. And I think, and now I was speaking very positive about the Green Deal, and it is really positive. I also now maybe want to put a little bit of criticism on it. What we see now is really interesting. It is basically green capitalism par excellence. I mean, it is kind of the Green Deal in Europe is called Europe's growth strategy. And this is what it is. No, there is a lot of investment, business model change. Before they were basically, burning fossils. Now, I don't know, like there's other business, and that's good. That's good. I mean, we need to move away from fossils. That's the most important thing. It's just I think that there has to be more in that first, and I love that the young people doing it, giving kind of the others that are in this existential crisis since a long time a voice. And I think Fridays for Future is doing that. They have a lot of this MAPA actions, and in this way, not only changing this, stopping the climate crisis, which is important, but then maybe also creating a little bit of more justice in this world and in this society. Because I think if we only go kind of the Green Deal, green capitalism, possibly we will, maybe we will even reach the 2 degrees. I'm not sure, but we also need to think about how this can be a real transformational thingy. For creating more justice, making more people being heard, because that was the problem before. The problem was there. Just nobody is listening to them because they do not have power. And I hope that we can, move this debate into this direction.
Thank you for those thoughts, Misha. And I think it really, really demonstrates as well, perhaps one of the reasons we're, experiencing Groundhog Day every single time with a COP is because of these discussions mostly based on, capitalist systems and capitalistic conceptions of how society operates, and it's coming close to those limits. The model of which our society is currently working in has those limits of resources, those limits that we have on how society functions, and that we do need this radical system change, this social justice to be collaborated and to see that being pushed forward for our future as well. I wonder if I can also bring in Clara at this point to offer your thoughts in response to this particular question as well, whether you think that young people can be agents of change.
Yeah, I think young people definitely can be. That is I think not the question actually, but I think it is very important what Micha mentioned about global justice in general, because I would say that young people, for example, in the European Union have kind of a very privileged position in being agents of change, in being listened to, and in, for example, just participating in COP negotiations, because there is a lot of funding for those young people to go there, whereas people from the global south, as we experienced it with our global young greens, didn't have any support and had to organize everything themselves. So I think this is the global justice perspective is just something that we always have to put on the forefront of when we try to make change. And then something that also just inspires me, you said, Sam, that you and Misha kind of are now giving over to an even younger generation, like Sean and me. But I am actually thinking about how my little sister, who is 15 years old, inspires me in doing all this climate activism work. And I think it is just so important to bring also the young people, the underage youngsters that are even not able to vote, but that are having just as huge as an impact, and to just bring them with us into this movement, because I think that is also a way to grow stronger and to even have a bigger voice in this all.
I think you're absolutely right, and I really think that it does continually give me hope when I have conversations with activists like yourself and Sean, and even I've done projects working with various school children. I did a project recently working with school children in the northeast of England in a place called Newcastle, and we asked them, what are the key issues? What would you want to do if you were in charge? And almost every single child talked about wanting to tackle climate change because they see this happening around them. They fear for the future, but they also see the possibilities and the hope that it can bring, and that it can make the world a better place as well. And I think that these conversations, as they evolve, are going to become even more interesting and even more developed in a really, really positive direction. We've actually had a few questions that have come in on our social media already. So we have had a question that has come in from Rihanna Johnston, and I think our wonderful tech team are going to bring it up on the screen for us very, very shortly. And what Rihanna says is, it's super inspiring to hear from you all. You're all doing a great job, folks. How can we continue to talk to and inspire the next generation of youth to keep up this fight? And how will the movement continue to adapt and evolve as the issues do too? So, Slater, I wonder if I could come to you first of all on this. Drawing on obviously the experiences that you've had in the film and that you've followed this journey for so many years, how do you think we can continue this inspiration that is happening of the next generation? Because one of the things I noticed in the film is that, okay, we're having these conversations again and again, but the amount of young people engaged has grown exponentially into gigantic amounts. So how do you think that we can continue this momentum?
Well, I think it's part of it is this growing community of young people that even throughout the pandemic have been connecting online and sharing their stories and really making this very real and making this more than numbers on a page or stories of fear or news articles that talk about a place that's away. I think as more and more we're seeing that not one person, what we're seeing more and more is that the climate crisis is affecting everyone, regardless of where we are, whether it's fires or heat waves or flooding or melting sea ice, that it's all connected. And I think we're seeing the movement continue to grow and continue to, I guess, inspire and bring in younger people, because we're seeing that this truly is happening right now. And this really is something that not only affects the future, but affects our present and affects our lives right now. And I think it's just continuing to create this safe place for people to come together and to share their experiences, but also to question the way that we're living right now. I think sometimes what maybe is not in the conversation that needs to be, like you were saying, is that it is this sense of urgency and that we are in an existential crisis of what kind of people we want to be and what we want our relationships to each other and the planet to look like. And I think we're starting to see more of that. We're starting to see conversations around, how do we actually adapt to the climate crisis that isn't just within some bizarre, glorified kind of greenwashing, green economy space, but actually looking at, okay, we've gotten to this point, we already hit the limits, we've been hitting them for a while, and we're actually being forced to change the way that we live. And I think that can be looked at as something that is nerve-wracking, but I think what's really cool is that a lot of young people are looking at it with the sense of optimism that, isn't this exciting that we get to finally create this world that we've always dreamed of? Isn't it exciting that we finally get to live in a caring and more just and sustainable world? And so I think that in and of itself is a draw and is inspiring, because so many other conversations and stories and what we see in the news is extremely divisive and frightening. So I think there is this sense of optimism that will continue inspiring and bringing people in as we continue this journey and this fight.
It feels such a gorgeously hopeful note, and I don't know why it came to my mind, but I always think of how the future is portrayed in science fiction series, like for example in Star Trek, where they talk about how society has evolved beyond this dependence on money, for example, and that those kind of futures are possible, and if we use our imaginations and engage and design and create those futures for ourselves, there's no reason why we can't follow those up with the actions. I'm just going to take this moment before we come to the rest of our panelists on some of these questions and others that we've had sent in, to just take a little sidestep to a clip that I think is probably a really good moment to show it in our discussion. And this is a really gorgeous clip from the film in which Slater really reflects on how the activists, Slater, that you've met have grown older and a new generation is kind of taking the mantle. So I think this is a really nice moment in our discussion to kind of put this in. So let's now take a look at this particular clip.
Of all the people I had talked to about meeting with in DC, one person was a special and welcome surprise.
Dude.
My old friend Abrar from Bangladesh.
How have you been, man? I've been so good. How are you doing? I'm all right.
How is are you exhausted? Like,
Very long. They don't have airport.
Abrar was now a father. He'd been thinking about moving his young family to the US, but ever since Trump's Muslim ban, he wasn't sure.
I'm in America.
Part of me can't believe Abrar, the goofy kid I met in Japan, is now a dad.
Can you say climate march? Can you give Baba a kiss?
We're getting older. There's a new generation of activists coming into their own. I can't believe many of these kids are the same age I was when I started making this film. They seem so much more confident, and in many ways, this weekend in DC was their moment.
So I think that was just for me personally. I don't know if Misha, you felt the same with this particular clip. I felt a little bit emotional about it because I was thinking, the times that I've been on the streets of Paris, I've been involved in other actions that have happened, and now we have with us today some of the younger activists who are now seeing even younger activists getting involved in the movement. And I really felt it was quite a gorgeous moment in the film that I wanted to share. But Misha, I wanted to come to you on this particular question, this discussion that we're having about how do we kind of keep this fight going and how do we bring on board more young people into the conversation. And yeah, what are your thoughts on that? And do you have any messages of hope to give us as well for how this may continue?
That's well, my first thought is that if you look at all of the movements that have actually changed, the world for the better in terms of democracy, women's rights, etc., people, they fought for this not because they choose, I will fight for this, but they fought for this because they have a pain, and this is existential, and it's a matter of survival. So this is like and I have the feeling this is also what we see now in the younger generations. This is not a question of let's do this. This is for many people in the world, and even more so for younger generations in kind of privileged countries, it's a matter of survival. Now, the problem is, so this gives you power, but also what we see is anxiety, climate anxiety. I can't pronounce this, but so like this kind of depression, like we will not win this fight. Politics is not moving fast enough, not listening, and that can really bring down the movement, and that can bring down the change. So the question is, how do we keep this power alive, this power of survival? And I think, first of all, we have to really understand this is a huge task. We are asking to change the fundamentals of this global economic structure, moving away from oil and gas that's an historic structure since 250 years that basically gave birth to this globalized world with the industrialization and so on. And we are changing this historic structure right now. So this is a huge task. And we are not it's not about like convincing politicians. There's a lot of people who are benefiting from polluting the climate, and this is what we are standing up against. And to really be fossil free, that's something completely new. So we are in a big historic situation, in a very historic moment. And I think that, so if even going for 3 years to the streets, it is something that already changed a lot, and it might take the next 20 years to go to the streets to be actually done. And even if we make this task in 20 years, then it's historically unique. So and then I think it's really important to speak about successes, because there are a lot of successes. I have said before, like, this is on the table. It is the Green Deal. It's the Build Back Better Future Act. Everywhere it is at the top of the agenda. So this is a success. The climate movements in Germany have called for like the end of coal in Germany by the year 2030. Now this is inside the government contract. This is a success of the movement. They did not ask for end of coal in 25 or in 2027. They asked for the year 2030, and now it's there. So this is their success. So I think they're powerful. There is something going on. And then I think then also for the future, like, what are the things that are winnable? What are the next steps that we can win, that the movements can win, in order to go from success to success? And I believe there are a lot. We can speak about, for instance, like the mobility transformation, the mobility revolution. We can speak about like a globe in Europe, a European coal phase out. We can speak about maybe having some kind of real green social deal that we should focus on. But like, I think this is important because we are like, actually, the movement is winning since 3 years all the time. And we should celebrate. It's just the last thing. Celebrate this wins that has been done, because they are big. And I've tried it from 2009 on. We said in 2009, how old will you be in 2050? And in Copenhagen was not a success. And then it was. Then there was like 10 years of silence, and now they are winning. So that's great, and it has to continue.
I feel so much more hopeful from the quite negative tone I striked at the beginning of the discussion to realise that there are, these victories, that we should always celebrate those moments where progress is made, and to take time to actually look around and recognise that those things have been achieved. So that's a really gorgeous contribution. Thank you very much, Misha. I'm going to come to Sean next. Sean, do you have any thoughts on how we can continue the climate movement? Perhaps even any thoughts that you may have on what's next, where next?
Yeah, so to start with some perhaps negativity and pessimism, we do, as Misha says, require an enormous change in society to disrupt power structures. To like my dad, who's going into his 60s soon and works in the oil industry in Scotland on oil rigs, I think we should stop drilling for oil pretty much tomorrow, and he's going to need to retrain, and that's not easy. It's not just about replacing a few electric cars, despite what liberals would like us to believe. This is a fundamental restructuring of society, and I don't quite see how the political will comes to be. And I see, for example, in France, where I live just now, that there's the rise of a fascist candidate for president, what I would call a fascist candidate for president, who is second or third in the polls next to a far-right candidate, and with a conservative in first place and a conservative in fourth place, none of whom take climate seriously. So where do we go from here? And I would say that the hope for me, and then how we think about moving forward as a movement, is a few strands to this. One, it's that our movement is huge. The climate movement, I would say, is the biggest social movement in the world, and we're growing, and we need to do better, but we're becoming more intersectional and more diverse. We're doing better at centering voices from the most affected people in areas. And what I would say is that we need to be intersectional, not only in terms of the people that are leading and part of our movements, but in terms of connecting to other issues. So right now in France, where I'm living, we are trying to stop a fascist becoming president. The climate movement has to link up with that, and is linking up with that. You have Youth for Climate Paris, like, sharing protests against this man's events. And that's how we build power. That's how we go forward. We look at the struggles that other people are having. Like, people are scared in France about this man becoming president. Women are scared. Immigrants are scared. Like, people who this man's rhetoric are marginalizing, this man's rhetoric is making, is endangering their safety, I would say. They're scared, and we build the climate justice movement by supporting the movements that are related to that anti-racist movement against fascism, and so on. And then we can really build transformational power, because we're not just saying, let's electrify the grid. We're saying, let's fundamentally transform the power structure of society for the betterment of people. And then, yeah, that's how we do it, I think.
Thank you. Yes, I think that really comes to that wonderful sentiment that we often say, that there is no climate justice without social justice as well. And I think you've done really well to encapsulate that, and a really important call for us to recognise how the climate fight that we have also connects with so many different intersections within society. And I think those are some really, really important things that we needed to hear. So thank you for sharing that, Sean. Clara, I'm going to come to you finally, and we actually have a question that's come in from our Secretary General, Mal Garcia, and I know that our tech team behind the scenes are going to pop this up on screen in just a second, but Mara's really said that in a disappointing framework of not enough, as young activists, what are the alliances still not woven that we are missing in order to have enough climate action? So Clara, I wonder if you could have a crack at answering Mara's question for us.
Yeah, so I think there's like two things that I have in my mind, which alliances are still missing. And the one is, like, speaking from my experience trying to do climate activism in Russia, when I just wanted, like, in my German mindset, looking up where I should go for a climate strike next Friday, and then texting people from Russia, and they were just telling me don't go because it's super dangerous. And I think this is a very important perspective or aspect to making the climate movement more intersectional, which is, I think, the future. But therefore we also need, like, global alliances and understand different global realities. And I think this is, like, especially as the Federation of Young European Greens, something that we have definitely to get better into, like, support with the privileged position that we are in here in Europe, that the Green Party is actually quite big, to support those people in contexts where it's actually not even possible to go on climate strikes because of the government that is, like, in power. And then also support, like, there have been, like, several Russian activists that have now seek for asylum in Germany, for example, because, and I think that, like, amplifying their voices and what they have to say, and like what the reality is in, for example, Russia, is super important to get to this point where we can maybe at one point say it is enough climate action. And then there is also a different aspect to it, which I think is, the European Green Party says that they want to amplify youth voices. But I think that the older generation has to realize that at one point, including youth voices also means for the older generation to give up part of their power and to bring in young people, not only as an addition, but as the decision makers. And I think, therefore, for example, as the Federation of Young European Greens, it would be amazing to work more closely with the European Green Party and get even more support for COP negotiations, for example, because why are we there as observers? Why don't we get party badges where we can then get into the negotiation spaces, for example? So I think that would be, like, an idea that I would find, like, very important, that we're actually not a nice addition to any climate talks, but that we are brought by the generation that has access to the negotiation spaces, that we are brought in as voices and as people that have a say, and not only, like, as tokens, basically.
Thank you. And I think that's a very, very powerful sentiment for us to end our discussion on today. I mean, we could probably talk about this for another 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. It's just been such a gorgeous, wonderful discussion, and I really feel that we've kind of landed on this really optimistic future, this intersectional future of climate activism, where we are celebrating the successes that have been made on the way, and recognizing that this movement has grown exponentially, that more and more people every day are getting involved and finding their route to climate activism, and then also plugging climate activism into other areas of society for a social and a just transition as well. So thank you very much to all of our speakers for joining us today, to Slater, to Misha, to Clara, to Sean. Thank you so much for your contributions. This conversation has been vital, I feel, in what has been happening and to help our understanding of what's happening outside of our doors, and also to make sense of what we do now that COP is over and that we hopefully are starting in the direction of moving towards the end of this awful pandemic. And I really think that this conversation is only starting here today, and please do continue to engage with us on social media. You can follow all of our activists on their various social media pages, and keep this conversation going. It's vital. We really want to hear your voice and have your voice to be part of this. So thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. It's been such a privilege and really, really an honor to have you with us. So thank you very much. So before we end today's session, we're now just going to turn to our little feature that we have every time we do on the green screens, which is our artistic spot. And we're going to be having a look at the work of NGO Act for Tomorrow. And we're going to see how a seawall mural, of all things, in Constant, Romania, has started a conversation about water protection. And this is a really intriguing proposition. I think it's definitely an interesting one to see. And one thing to watch out for on this is that the paint on the mural itself actually purifies the air around it, which I think is incredible. So let's take a look at our artistic spot.
Sunt Andrei Corșuleanu și sunt fondatorul asociației Act for Tomorrow. În anul 2020 am ajuns la Constanța, pe plaja Reina, un loc care, încărcat de o energie pozitivă, mi-a dat speranța că putem să facem un program grandios acolo. Atunci am văzut un zid care nu transmitea nicio vibrație, nu transmitea nicio energie către oamenii care se uitau la el. În anul 2021 am simțit că este momentul să dăm viața acelui zid. Împreună cu Kaufland România și cu Primăria Constanța, alături de Alex Baciu, artistul care a acceptat provocarea de a își pune semnătura pe o pictură de 2000 de metri pătrați, ne-au dat speranța că acel zid se transformă într-o inimă a comunității. În tot acest timp am văzut oameni care veneau, făceau poze și ne întrebau ce se întâmplă acolo. Le-am povestit despre dorința noastră de a transmite un mesaj către protejarea apelor. Și asta pentru noi era de fapt motivația de a continua, de a nu abandona o luptă grea, dar care avea un final foarte, foarte ambițios. Acela de a face cea mai mare pictură murală din lume cu o vopsea care purifică aerul.
Mi-am dorit foarte mult să transform pictura asta murală într-un landmark al Constanței. Este o lucrare practic frumoasă cromatic, dar are un mesaj destul de important și poate sever, pot să spun, și dur. Tu de la depărtare, overall, când te uiți, pare că este o pictură cumva destinată turismului, știi? Dar nu asta am vrut. Am vrut efectiv să ai timp, să-ți dai timp, să descoperi problemele noastre esențiale din zilele de astăzi.
În ziua în care am inaugurat pictura murală a fost o efervescență cum rar am mai întâlnit. Oameni de toate vârstele, copii, părinți, oameni mai în vârstă, erau alături de noi și se bucurau împreună cu noi de această reușită. Îmi doresc ca astfel de proiecte să fie replicate, să fie îmbrățișate de cât mai mulți oameni, indiferent din țara în care provin aceștia, și să înceapă să respire sănătos prin astfel de programe artistice. Pentru că da, arta, indiferent de colțul în care ne aflăm al lumii, poate crea până la urma urmei comunități și în același timp poate contribui pentru a aduce oamenii împreună pentru o cauză comună, aceea de a proteja planeta, extraordinar de importantă această cauză în zilele în care ne aflăm.
I think I'm definitely going to be making sure after the pandemic ends to book a trip to go and see this landmark in Constanta, because I think it really shows how change can happen through art, opening discussions, creating debate, but actually having art that physically, in its own material properties, can really change and clean the world around us. So thank you very much for joining us today. Please remember, you can still watch our film Youth Unstoppable this evening. So grab your popcorn, put up your feet, and enjoy the movie. This is such a remarkable film. I think I'm going to go watch it again after I've finished our discussion today. Don't forget, you can share your thoughts with us about the film through the European Green Party and Green Screen Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And we will be back next month exploring a topic of a call for global solidarity. Make sure you follow all of our social media channels, because we will be revealing the selected movie very, very soon. Big thank you again to all of our panel, and a huge thank you to all of our team behind the scenes who have helped pull things together for tonight's discussion. See you next time. Stay safe and healthy, and have a great evening.